What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another highly combustible reaction. We're jumping into something. The Swamp Dragon, the Staggering Siege of s-Hertogenbosch in 1629. Let's jump in. Let's check it out together. If you guys enjoy, get over show, send Roman history some love. Shout out to Mikhail for taking us on these damn journeys. I get excited now for history. I've never ever gotten excited for history in the past, but here we are, excited for it. Let's jump in. Let's roll.
Thanks for sponsoring this video. In 1629, the Dutch Republic was on the brink of financial ruin and hard-pressed from all sides. Amidst a strategical encirclement of fortresses and the threatening presence of the Spanish field army, Frederick Henrik, called the Conqueror of Cities, was marching to the south of the Republic. He wanted to capture the strongest fortress of the Spanish encirclement, s-Hertogenbosch. This fortress town was deemed impregnable and was affectionately called the Swamp Dragon by contemporaries. Its pantries were full, its powder chambers stuffed, and its defenders ready to throw anyone back that would come close to their wall. It looked like the Conqueror of Cities chose his target poorly. When the 12 years truce between Spain and the United Netherlands ended in 1621, one of the most brutal phases of the 80 Years' War began. The Spanish had realized that they could not conquer the northern Netherlands, but they nonetheless continued to exert pressure for two reasons. Firstly, they wanted to enforce better conditions for Catholics in the Protestant Republic. And secondly, they kept up the pressure in order to force the United Netherlands to withdraw their troops from the overseas colonies, where the Dutch were increasingly interfering with Spanish plans. To this end, they imposed a trade embargo on the Republic, had the Armada of Flanders disrupt Dutch naval activities on the North Sea, and attempted to isolate the country on land along the Maas-Waal and IJssel lines. The strongest and most important fortress of the Spanish land blockade was the city of s-Hertogenbosch. According to the historian Jonathan Israel, this strategic blockade put such a strain on the Dutch that the years between 1621 and 1628 were to become the darkest period of the Republic's history. It was only with great difficulty that it could resist the Spanish attacks, and the financial burdens of seclusion weighed heavily on the Dutch people. But from 1624 onward, the Spanish were getting in trouble themselves. It soon became a challenge to bring troops to the Spanish Netherlands. On one hand, the sea route was constantly attacked by England, which had joined the war on the Protestant side. On the other hand, the so-called Spanish Road, along which a large part of troops and supplies were brought to the Spanish Netherlands, was also interrupted several times for the next 25 years. This was mainly due to local conflicts in the southeast of what is modern-day Switzerland, which made some important mountain passes unusable.
They really didn't have it easy.
As a result, the Spanish army in the Low Countries was largely cut off, poorly paid, and insufficiently supplied. Frederick Henrik, the Prince of Orange, who had been stadtholder of the Republic since 1625, took advantage of the Spanish weakness to launch a counterattack. He captured the cities of Oldenzaal in 1626 and Groenlo 1 year later. His successes earned him the name Stedentwinger in Dutch, Conqueror of Cities. While Frederick Henrik was fighting the Spanish stranglehold, the Spanish Empire was running out of money. The Spanish king, Philip IV, was forced to declare national bankruptcy in 1627. 1 year later, the situation became even worse when the famous admiral of the Dutch West India Company, Piet Hein, captured the Spanish treasure fleet in Matanzas Bay, east of Havana. The fleet's silver cargo was worth about 11.5 million guilders, a gigantic sum at the time. This translates to a modern-day purchasing power of about $500 million. Because the Spanish lost their vital supply of silver from overseas too, they had to reduce their army and abandon their offensive war in the Netherlands. In January of 1629, the pressure on Spain was so great that Philip IV asked for a truce, but the Republic was aware of the situation and cunningly refused. The Republic now had the money for a substantial counterattack. Frederick Henrik prepared to break the stranglehold that had been choking the Republic for so long. The conqueror of cities wanted to slay the Swamp Dragon.
We need a movie, like a legitimate movie about this.
No one expected Frederick Henrik to attack s-Hertogenbosch, of all places, when he was marching south in the spring of 1629. He had the choice between the three most important.
We gotta stop for a second and just shout out Sound Roman history, because these are like holding your attention. The visuals are always spectacular. There's animations, there's things going on. Just the whole movement of it. It's very visually appealing as much as it is appealing to learn. Like, I don't know. I wish we had your videos when I was going through high school and we got to learn all of this stuff. This would have been way cooler than what we learned.
Lingen, Wesel, and s-Hertogenbosch. s-Hertogenbosch was the most important, but also the best fortified of the three cities. It was called Moerasdraak, Swamp Dragon, and was considered impregnable because of a wide body of water that drowned every attempt to approach the city with conventional siege methods. This was very effective in the early modern period, when it was required to dig a lot of trenches in order to approach a town safely, without being shot to smithereens. Mining, too, was impossible in such terrain, as the tunnel would simply be flooded at some point. In fact, it was impossible to take the town in a siege as long as the water was in the way. Neither was there an easy way around it, since the swamp area was fed by two rivers, the Dommel and the Aa. The swamp was constantly replenished and almost never fell dry. The only dry pathways to the town were the roads from Vught and Hindham, but these were protected extraordinarily well by impenetrable hornworks. The fortifications had been upgraded by the Spanish in the course of the last few years, and had so far kept
I wouldn't want to be the bastard that had to attack
intruders.
it.
A modern bastion system protected most of the town, and the two weakest points were reinforced by additional forts. s-Hertogenbosch had proven its steadfastness many times, for example in 1601, when the famous Maurice of Orange had failed at its walls. No dragon rider, but firmly in the saddle as governor of the city, was a man with an extraordinarily beautiful name, Antony Schets, Baron of Grobbendonk. The experienced military man had one of the largest garrisons in the southern Netherlands at hand. It consisted of almost 3,500 men and was reinforced at the last moment by 850 more soldiers from Breda and Eindhoven, who slipped through the Republic's lines. From the beginning, Schets also involved the civilian population in the defenses and had them stand guard, improve the defenses, or help out otherwise.
We've already heard some of this information now, but this is a cool way to see it. I'm telling you, I'm just entranced with the visuals. This whole thing it makes learning fun. And his voice, the way that he puts it out there, the way that he drops the information, it's never like, it's like edge of the seat type stuff. It's never boring. You're never just sitting back here like, oh yeah. We get nothing but good history documentaries over here. I'm saying, you guys don't really send me anything garbage, but if it's some old school, like way back in the day, boring, sit in the classroom type stuff, I don't want it. This stuff is all exciting. The other documentary, the whole Dutch Golden Age documentary, all of those, it holds your attention. This makes people want to know more. Plus, it's a really cool history anyway. Y'all have been through the ringer up there.
Guard, improve the defenses, or help out otherwise. The town also had formidable supplies. The granaries were full, livestock was available in great numbers, and the water supply was secured by a number of wells. Well protected, guarded, and supplied, the Swamp Dragon didn't even flinch when the Dutch arrived at the town. Frederick Henrik and most of his army reached s-Hertogenbosch in late April of 1629. In spring, he had gathered an army of some 24,000 infantry, of which 5,000 were Scots and 9,000 Englishmen, who assembled on the Moker Heide on the 27th of April. At this point in time, the Spanish were still uncertain where Frederick Henrik would march. Only when the Republic crossed the Maas at Grave, it became clear that he would go south. Since Breda seemed to be the most likely candidate for a siege, and it was considered an act of insanity to go for s-Hertogenbosch, part of the city's powder reserves were brought to Breda. A mistake, as became clear, when the 4,000 Dutch cavalrymen who formed the vanguard of Frederick Henrik's army began to occupy villages around s-Hertogenbosch on the 30th of April. When the main army arrived near Vught on the next day, it was too late to correct the mistake. Almost simultaneously, several Dutch ships docked north of the city. They brought artillery, ammunition, and other supplies. The men of the Republic immediately set to work. They knew that s-Hertogenbosch could not be taken by assault, and accordingly began to invest the city. To this end, Frederick Henrik ordered several fortified camps to be set up on the slightly elevated access roads, from which 2 rings of fortifications were to be laid out. For the Dutch, it was crucial to complete these defenses as quickly as possible, because without them, they were sitting ducks. For the first few days, they focused on building the circumvallation line, which would protect them from outside attacks. And only then they took to the contravallation line, which protected them against sorties and closed the city off. According to the siege expert Christoph Duffy, these constructions consisted of earthen ramparts with a double ditch, 2 parapets and some palisades. Particularly vulnerable spots were reinforced with redoubts of earth, forts and outworks. The army of sappers, which Frederick had summoned, accomplished this Herculean task astonishingly quickly, even though the flooded terrain provided great difficulties. By the 18th of May, the 2 lines, the outer of which was about 45 kilometers long, had been completed.
And all of the people in the city just had to sit there and watch this taking place. Like, hey, they're building some new things out there. Hey, we're really cut off over here. That would be horrifying. Absolutely terrifying to be in the city. I would not. No. I would have to probably swim across a river and get the hell out of there before they finish building the wall, before they finish building their parapets and stuff. No, you're really closed off now. They weren't playing when they decided to take this place. That's for sure. We'll get it on all sides. We're gonna make sure we cut off the routes in and out of the city. Like, it wasn't just like a, hey, let's attack this place. It was like a whole on thing. This would have taken forever.
On foot, it took more than 11 hours to walk once around the entire installation.
Holy sh!
The contravallation was immediately equipped with artillery, and soon the impacts of their first cannonballs shook city and citizens. Just like the attackers, the defenders grabbed the shovels before they grabbed their guns. The commander, Grobbendonck, ordered to patch the weaknesses of his defenses immediately. He had his men and the townspeople reinforce gates, repair damaged sections of the walls, and tear down the houses outside the walls that blocked their view. For the first few days, only a few sorties on the northern side of the city took place. There were a number of skirmishes, while Fort Isabella's gunners kept up an ongoing barrage at the approaching Dutch. Despite having his back secured, Frederick Henrik knew that nothing was settled yet. He was now facing the most formidable obstacle on his way to the town walls, the flooded area. When he ordered his workers to the shovels again, it looked like insanity to some, but he in fact knew exactly what he was doing. 2 huge dams were constructed to divert the Aa and the Dommel rivers. This gargantuan project allowed them to take an ace off the defenders' hand and add it to their own. Now, they themselves were protected by a flooded area, while the area of water around the town was cut off from its tributaries. Now, it was time to proceed to the next step of their plan.
We diverted
Laboriously working,
rivers.
the Dutch engineers set up huge mills, driven mostly by horses or wind power, that slowly drained the polder area inside the contravallation line. By the end of May, the vast flooded area was indeed dry enough to begin digging trenches.
Hey boss, they got a lot of water over there. What do you want to do? well, let's just wait till it dries up. And that's what they did. This is like really genius, brilliant tactics where you're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to stop this river from flowing. This river gives them all their stuff. We're going to go ahead and just stop up that river. People would have thought you was crazy. If I was on that shovel team, I'd be like, what are we doing? But you guys really thought it through. The whole thing. All right, now we just wait. Once it dries up, then we'll go over there. And it's not even like that. It's small bodies of water that we're talking about here. It takes 11 hours to walk around the house. That's pretty damn big, and that's a lot of water in between there. Talking about drying up huge ass lakes. They may not have been very deep, but they were still huge ass lakes. That's some crazy war tactics. When you talk about, whoa, we'll just wait them out.
S-Hertogenbosch had lost its most important trump card. All of a sudden, the swamp dragon
was a desert
without
toad.
A swamp, like a fish out of the water.
Yeah, not hell no.
Although all had gone
I
well
love
so
the maps.
far,
It really
Frederick
puts it
knew
into perspective.
the matter was
Holy
still not settled yet. There were rumors of a relief army, and the tall walls of s-Hertogenbosch were yet to be taken. Still, for now, the most formidable obstacle was eliminated, and the second phase of the siege could begin. Frederick Henrik ordered his men to dig approaches from all 5 headquarters in order to disguise his true main direction of attack. Wilhelm van Nassau, Willem Pijnsen, and Johann Wolfert van Broderode made only slow progress and eventually had to give up because the ground on their sides was still wet. But Ernst Casimir made good progress. Covered by the continuous fire of 6 artillery pieces, he advanced shovel by shovel towards the hornworks at the Hindhammer Gate. Grobendonck knew the medieval walls near this gate were a weak point. He ordered his men to reinforce this side and moved more guns there. However, the additional cannons were of little use without the powder that had been sent to Breda earlier. To make up for this, Grobendonck ordered more sorties. He had groups of his soldiers sneak out of the city at night and attack the workers in the trenches, destroy bridges and dams, and set fire to palisades, powder reserves, and bulwarks. On several occasions, they even managed to penetrate to the enemy batteries and capture ammunition and weapons. These nightly raids were a high-risk, high-reward endeavor. If a sallying force was caught, chances were good that none of them would return. If the men in the trenches were taken by surprise, however, this could result in a major setback for the besiegers. Despite all this hardship, Frederick Henrik drove his men forward. On his side of the town, the situation was most promising because the terrain was somewhat higher and therefore drier. But there were 2 other problems, namely Fort Isabella and Fort St. Anthony. These bulwarks forced the Dutch to dig 2 linked trench systems in the direction of these fortifications. Protected by a large battery, Frederick's men reached Fort Isabella first. The fortress was well built, and there was almost no chance to take it by storm. Because of this, the Dutch installed several mortars and began to shoot at the fort's interior, hoping to force the garrison to surrender. At first, this failed. Although, on the 17th of July, they hit the commander's house, which served as an ammunition depot, and the fort was shaken by a huge explosion, the defenders stood firm. It was only after a mine brought down parts of a bastion that a white flag was waved over the walls of Fort Isabella. A day later, on the 19th of July, St. Anthony surrendered too. Now, the way to the city was clear. As the attackers were coming closer, the spirits of the defenders were sinking. They knew that the fall of the 2 forts exposed the Wugterreind, the southern part of the city towards the village Wucht. In addition, there was a severe shortage of men, gunpowder and ammunition on every end. Grobendonck ordered every spare hand to gather lead from private households and gutters in order to cast it into bullets. But this helped only little, and there was no way to make up for the lack of powder. Soon, food became too expensive for the poor. Therefore, Grobbendonck introduced fixed prices and rationed scarce goods. Thanks to this, and unlike in many other sieges, there were barely any victims of famine, even though many spent their last coin on hard bread. Life in the city was anything but a bed of roses.
Yeah, no, hell
People
no.
lived in constant fear, and a continuous hail of cannonballs claimed many victims and destroyed many homes. A ring of ruins soon stretched along the city walls, and St. John's Cathedral was riddled with bullets. With every meter the attacker got closer, the shelling became denser and more deadly. The worst enemy of the defenders, however, was not a visible one. By building the two dams, the Dutch had cut off the city's fresh water supply, and thus brought the sewer, the Dieze, to a standstill.
Oh,
As a
no.
result, feces, garbage, and all sorts of other unsanitary refuse remained in the city. The cloaca could only be drained after extensive rainfall, which was very rare from May to July. This unsanitary situation led to several epidemics, claiming a death toll way higher than the bullets of the Republic. By June,
That's a long war. You wait. We're just gonna sit here. We done redirected rivers, blocked off water supplies, dug trenches everywhere, built palisades, got right up to the walls, got them having a pandemic, multiple pandemics on the east side. I don't even think that we can really fathom how big this is, like how incredibly long and hard and arduous of a task this was to take over this city. But they did.
the morale of the defenders was so low that Grobbendonck was barely able to keep the population in line. He made sure that only good news got through to the people and instructed the clergy to instill good courage in the population.
What the
But despite all propagandistic efforts, one thing was clear. The only hope was help from the outside. In May, the Dutch Republic was shaken by bad news. Hendrik van den Berg, the commander of the Spanish Army of Flanders, and, ironically, a cousin of Frederick Henrik, was raising an army to relieve s-Hertogenbosch. Due to Spain's miserable financial situation, it took a while, but in June 23,000 men were marching to come to s-Hertogenbosch's aid. Frederick Henrik braced himself. He prioritized securing his supply lines and had the circumvallation improved even further. Hendrik van den Berg's army marched from Turnhout to Haren, where a council of war was held on the 27th of June, and where it was decided to attack on the 5th of July. When the day had come, van den Berg and the main army set out for a divisionary maneuver. While they drew the besiegers' attention to the side of Vlijmen, two major detachments attacked the circumvallation near the river Dommel at the location of the right of Frederick Henrik's camp and between Broderodes and Casimir's camp. For several hours, the attackers tried to push through in a bloody struggle, but the ramparts of the Dutch gave them a hard time. Despite huge losses, they remained adamant and finally even broke through one of the dikes. However, their intelligence had failed them. They broke through the wrong dike and came to nothing. Exhausted and downcast, the Spaniards had to retreat. However, van den Berg had no intent of giving in. He marched his army to the Veluwe, where an invasion near the heartland of the Republic should force Frederick Henrik away from s-Hertogenbosch. Van den Berg crossed the IJssel at Dieren, where he built a fortified bridge to secure his supply routes. And on the 10th of August, he met with General Ernesto Montecuccoli, who had arrived with imperial reinforcements. In the meantime, Frederick Henrik had indeed no choice but to see to the defense of the threatened region. He recruited some 13,000 new soldiers, reinforced Grave, Ravenstein, and threatened towns along the IJssel, and sent Ernst Casimir to Arnhem with 10,000 men of the siege army. Shortly after the arrival of the imperial reinforcements, the Spanish assault began. Montecuccoli attacked Amersfoort and Harderwijk with about 10,000 men, and then threatened Utrecht and Naarden. while the Count of Salazar was attacking Hatem with 6,000 men and threatened Friesland. Hendrik van den Berg, meanwhile, was to block the IJssel crossing at Dieren. At first, the plan seemed to work. When the two foreign armies were seen so close by, panic gripped the Republic. Many wanted to abandon the siege of s-Hertogenbosch. Frederick Henrik, however, would have none of it. Too much had already been invested. Too many sacrifices already made. Too great the progress that had been achieved. Besides, the skillful strategist Frederick Henrik knew exactly that the Spaniards had chosen the wrong target for their attack. The Veluwe was a poor rural area that barely yielded enough to support its own inhabitants, let alone a foreign army. Because of this, they had to bring all supplies over Van den Berg's IJssel bridge. Soon, time proved Frederick Henrik right. Salazar dashed against the walls of Hatem and Harderwijk and had to leave without having achieved anything. In addition, the Dutch commander had correctly identified the weakness of the Spanish, their supply lines. He had his men raid supply trains on the way from Wesel to the IJssel bridge. While these were only pinpricks at first, the fatal blow was already planned.
Jesus.
On the 19th of August, the Dutch launched a large-scale counterattack. They surprised the defenders of Wesel and captured the town very quickly. This cut off one of the most important supply lines of the Spanish army and was a crushing blow to the Spanish relief campaign. Montecuccoli immediately surrendered Amersfoort, and soon after, the bulk of the Imperial Spanish army withdrew from the Veluwe. When news reached the town, and the Dutch made sure it did, the mood in the city hit rock bottom. It was now clear to everyone that it was a matter of time before s-Hertogenbosch was going to fall. Despite the reduced manpower due to Ernst Casimir's prior withdrawal, losses and desertions, pressure remained high on the city. The trenches almost reached the walls at Hintem Gate and the Woojer. The Republic's workers were now building two galleries along the flanks of the bastion east of the gate. Now, there remained but two obstacles for the besiegers to overcome: the walls and their own exhaustion. According to the historian Peter Kover, they were sometimes unable to man all trenches, so that some sallying forces from the city even came across empty trenches. Both sides had reached the end of the line. Despite this, Grobendonck insisted on holding out as long as possible in order to save face. However, the population of s-Hertogenbosch was at the end. Children and the elderly had been working hard for months on reduced rations. Civilians had been on guard duty and hardly anyone had not yet lost a family member. People did not want to fight a losing battle, and they feared the town had resisted for too long and was going to be looted as was customary. In early September, riots against the iron fist of the governor rose. He increasingly came under pressure, especially when the powder reserves finally ran out as well. On the 4th of September, only 113 barrels were left, of which around 20 were used every day. But the straw that finally broke the camel's back was a mine under the bastion of the Woojer. It tore down a large part of the fortification. The dragon's shell was broken. Although the defenders managed to push the Dutch back after some time, the city council now finally decided to negotiate surrender. On the 12th of September, a delegation of the city arrived at Frederick Henrik's camp. After extended negotiations, the garrison was promised safe conduct and departure under flying colors. The conditions for the town were much less generous than those for the garrison. The city was allowed to keep all its rights as long as it did not act against the interests of the Republic. But all Catholics, except for the nuns, had to leave the city and all churches passed into Protestant hands. On the 14th of September, the surrender was signed, and on the 17th of September, the garrison and the Catholics left the city in an impressive caravan of about 1,200 wagons. The loss of their strongest fortress drove waves of shock through the Spanish Netherlands and was a cause for jubilation in the Republic. Tourists flocked to s-Hertogenbosch in masses, to marvel with their own eyes at the great deed of their army. Frederick Henrik was the hero of the day. He defeated the swamp dragon and broke the Spanish stranglehold. If you're looking to build any business similar to our channel or want to engage in e-commerce of any sort, check out the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. We are building our own website with Squarespace, and it's much easier than we expected. For example, by using Squarespace's professional designs, we can customize the layout, look and feel of our website very easily. Also, with Squarespace's integrated traffic overview feature, we can track trends and page visits as well as views to better optimize our content. And lastly, Squarespace's email campaign tools enable us to create engaging emails that match our normal design to communicate more easily with our audience. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Sandroman to save 10% of your first purchase of a website or domain.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The swamp dragon. My Lord of mercy. The swamp dragon did fall, though. That's intense. The whole thing was intense from start to finish. Not something that I would have wanted to be a part of, but damn sure something that I'm a little bit disappointed. I didn't know until you guys. Like, world history should be more world history, I guess, instead of just being about who your enemies are, being about some actual world history. This is very, very cool. This got me wanting to look into battles of other places for sure. Different things that took place. Love me some tactics. And I'll be damned if stopping a river and everything like that is not a tactic. Like, we see some craziness, absolutely ridiculous stuff, and I appreciate every single one of you for it. Definitely get over to show San Roman history some love. That's absolutely crazy. The animations, the everything, it just makes you stay right there with the video. Shout out to Mikhail again for a fantastic damn journey. Smash the like button if you liked it. The dislike button, but something's wrong with you. Tell the next room how the combustible. You guys be happy, healthy, safe. Look me to the moon and back. Peace.